Welcome to another episode of the Ben McGreevy Sports Podcast. Tonight, we've actually seen live hockey. Cole and Heath joined me, and we walked through our experience at last night's Nashville Predators preseason game. We talk about new things that we see in the arena, the feeling that it gave us to be back in the arena, and then we go in and we break down the Nashville Predators roster and say what we want the Lions to look like, who makes it, who doesn't make it. And we talk about Yaroslav Askarov, and Heath, as a goalie, breaks down what he saw last night out of this future superstar. I think there's a lot of great Nashville Predators content in today's show, and so pull up a chair, toss on some headphones, and let's get started on today's episode of the Ben McGreevy Sports Podcast. All right, we're getting started. Today, joining us, I mentioned this earlier, but we have Cole and we have Heath. You guys saw them on episode 1 and episode 2. We're all three together. The OG Hattie podcast finally reunited, and it feels so good. Last night, we were in Bridgestone Arena for the first preseason game of the year. And let me tell you, it felt incredible. Guys, before we really get into any lineup stuff for the Preds, let's just talk. What'd you feel like being in the arena last night? Let's talk atmosphere. Let's talk crowd. Let's talk, game if you want, at whatever it is. What do you guys think about being at Bridgestone for the first time? It felt like forever last night.
Tell you what, I'll start because I was only there for the later game. So I have no opinion on the first one, but the second game was packed. I mean, first game, preseason, and the whole lower bowl was full. By mid-first period, most of the lower bowl was full. Most of the club level was full. And even the upper bowl, I mean, there were probably 14 to 15,000 people there for a preseason game. That's nuts. Energy was high. The crowd was into it. The chants were going. So it felt really good to be back.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, Ben and I went to games 1 and 2, the 3 p.m. and the 7 p.m. But obviously the 3 p.m. wasn't nearly as crowded as it's in the middle of the day on a Monday. But I thought both games were really well. I mean, get a good look for, who's trying to make the roster, who's already probably in the roster there. And it was a good time. It was good to be back in Bridgestone. Like Cole said, a great atmosphere in the second game there last night. Kind of shocking. I mean, free tickets for most people, but that many people showing up for a preseason game after this team came off a pretty disappointing postseason playoff sweep.
That was exactly my thought. I could not get over, and I kept on looking around and being like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why are there this many people here? And sometimes I get very emotional, unnecessarily so. And I sit there and think we experienced the 2007, 2008 years when it was regular season and you would walk into the lower bowl and there just was no one there. And it was just empty all the time. And you could get tickets for $10 to a regular season game. And even when they were decent, like in the early 2010s, you could still get on StubHub and buy a ticket for $11. And to me, that was just wild to sit there and look around last night at the stadium, and it was packed and it was loud. And when there was a goal, it had noise and volume. And I don't know, it just felt special. I thought it didn't make sense. The 3:00 game, Heath, you mentioned this, wasn't as full, but it was probably more full than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for 3 p.m. in the middle of the afternoon on a Monday, it was a lot fuller than I thought it would have been.
Same here. What did you guys think? There were a few arena differences. Did you guys think anything, not anything major? What did you guys see that was new in the arena that you liked at Bridgestone?
First one that caught my eye walking in the door were the menu screens above the concession stands. I was like, wow, I can actually read what that concession stand actually has, besides just leaning over the bar and unnecessarily squinting at the little peg letters that you slide into those little boards. So that was a nice change. That was the first thing I noticed. I don't know if I caught anything in particular in the actual arena though.
I'm sure Ben, you would mention this, but we caught this in that first game. I think it was the first game, maybe in the second game. The stats and analytics on the Jumbotron, I think if you're that kind of person, it really helps the game if you want to really kind of track it. So that was a pretty unique little addition they added.
Yeah, I really loved that. I wish they kind of would have kept it up there the entire time. They would flash it up on the Jumbotron every once in a while, but it had like the players on ice and their stats underneath. I would love, you could get used to, if that was up all the time, glancing at the scoreboard to be like, or the, what do they call, Fang Vision is what it's called, but glancing at Fang Vision and being like, all right, who's out there and how long have they been out there? I think that I could become reliant on that if they left it in. That would be me for sure.
I agree. I liked it on, and you had mentioned it last night now that you talked about it, but I liked it on the round LED boards that go around the arena, like I was mentioning to you, because it stayed up the whole time. And I noticed that block of the LED board sometimes would just be black. So I don't know if the Fang Vision was something they were testing or if they might do both. But it did look really good. And it was very clean and clear on the Fang Vision. So no complaints there. But like you said, I would like to see it a little more frequently during the game.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only downside to it for some people, I guess for maybe half the arena, it would take up space on Fang Vision. But I guess they could. My only thought, I think a lot of arenas use that screen below or like almost inside the Jumbotron for the stats, but it would be really small. So if you're pretty far away, it'd be pretty hard to see. But I do like it. Hopefully it stays. It was a pretty cool little unique addition.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, it was kind of a breath of fresh air just to be in the arena last night. I felt like there were a lot of people there who just were happy to be in the arena watching hockey. And like the amount of people who stayed the entire game through a blowout win shocked me. And I don't know, to me, that just showed, hey, Nashville has consistently been one of the best buildings in the league. And I felt like they were starting to lose it. And we have talked about that as a group before, like Bridgestone Arena is losing some of its allure. But I don't know, last night it kind of felt like, hey, this could be back.
Yeah. Seems to come back in the weirdest times.
Yeah.
Like a preseason hockey game on a Monday.
So bizarre. The second half of a doubleheader. So strange. All right, let's go ahead and transition into Nashville Predators lineup. And if you're a fan of another team, I'm so sorry. We're not spending a lot of time talking about your team tonight. We're going to get into a lot of other NHL teams as the season goes on. It's just so hard to track other teams right now. I'll mention this. Kevin Fiala looked real good last night. Did you guys see the highlights of that LA game?
I did. He looked pretty impressive.
LA's could be very good this year, and Fiala could have a huge season. I don't know, kind of exciting for him. But other than that, I don't know. We're just going to get straight into the roster stuff for the Nashville Predators. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through line by line and just say, who do we want on this line? Who do we want on this line? Who do we want on this line? And I think that for us, a lot of these are going to be the same. Like, I think that, and you might be sitting there being like, yeah, obviously. And we might have seen some things last night that we liked, but we're just going to walk through it. Heath, I'm going to let you start. First line, who you have on your first line for the Nashville Predators this year. And then we'll go Cole, and then I'll say what I'm thinking.
Yeah, for that first line, there's a few things that could be swapped around, I think. But I really like a Matt Duchene Forsberg and probably that left wing for me is a little bit odd because part of me wants to throw in or not left wing, the right wing. That's a tough one because I think there's quite a few people that could go there. But I think for me, with this team, the way it's built, I don't know. I'd like to hear what y'all want to say because this is a tough one for me on this right wing.
I went pretty basic. I went Forsberg, Granlund centering, Forsberg, and Duchene. That's my top line. They skated together last year some. It worked out. I mean, that line was dominant. So I wouldn't even change it.
I agree with
Yeah.
that. I agree with that totally. That is exactly what I had as my top line. I just think that the total complete game that Granlund brings is really good. I think that you're going to see him ramp it up this year. I don't know why I feel like you're going to get a big year out of Granlund. It's like he's planted his roots in Nashville. He's wearing a letter, which is exciting. And then you have Forsberg, who, by the way, in last night's game, fired a rocket of a goal, and it was past Spencer Knight. Like, it wasn't
beautiful,
some random goalie. That's a piece of news as well. Spencer Knight signed a pretty big deal today for the Florida Panthers. They have a lot of money tied up in goaltending, but Forsberg launched it, and Duchesne is so fast. I just love that line so much. Cole or Heath, do you like that? Is that kind of who you were thinking, or were you thinking something else?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm thinking there. If part of me wants to, I think they'll probably try out a little bit of Niederreiter somewhere in there. I think it could flip flop. I really like Niederreiter with Johansson. I thought that line yesterday with Tomasino was fantastic, and I think that'll generate a lot of offense.
As I was say, let's transition into that second line there. That to me was a very obvious line. We talked about it in week 1, or the first podcast of the year. Like, Niederreiter and Johansson were dominant together in juniors, and I think adding that young gun and Philip Tomasino is a nice little touch. What do you guys like about that line?
Yep, I had the exact same line. I had Ryan Johansson centering Niederreiter and Tomasino for my second line. So kind of like Heath was saying, with the past history that Niederreiter and Johansson have playing together, not in the NHL, but they're in their youth. I think they're going to have some of that chemistry there even through the years. And then adding Tomasino up there, the young gun who was impressive last year. So I'm really excited to see what that line can do.
Tomasino had a super underrated season last year. Like, he was very impressive and was way better than I think people realized. And he was just consistent every night. You didn't necessarily ever sit there and think, man, he just caused chaos or caused an issue. He was just kind of consistently good all year. What do you guys think expectations for that line points wise? What are we thinking out of those guys?
Tomasino had, I think, 11 goals last year. You're not expecting this guy to be a Forsberg this early. He could get there one day. I think there's a lot of room for growth. He had 11 goals, 21 assists for 32 points. I'd like to see him get to the good old Craig Smith 18 to 20 goals this year. I think that would be a good contribution from him. And that second line is going to have to score. You're going to have to get more scoring than Forsberg and Duchesne eventually coming down the line.
Heath, what do you think about that?
I agree with that. I mean, with Tomasino, obviously still an entry-level deal. I think for him, he's going to have to – his like Cole's saying, kind of the run-of-the-mill, your kind of second-line winger, such as a Smith or somebody like that can put up about 20 to maybe 25 goals on a season, but has speed, right? That can, get up and down the ice and can back check too. I think, he kind of reminds me, I don't think he's as good. Maybe he will be as good as Thomas, he kind of reminds me of Arvidsson in a way of his speed and his size. But if he can get to that 30 goal mark eventually, I think that'd be great. But he's, you got to find that healthy balance of offensive zone production and your back check in the defensive zone. But I like Tomasino and like that line. I think they can produce a lot with Niederreiter and Johansson.
What would you be happy with point wise from those guys? And by the way, we could have talked about this with our first line of Granlund, Forsberg, and Duchesne, but I think that all three of those guys are going to be over 60 points. Like, I think that's a lock, right?
Yeah.
Easily. Do we think that the second line of Johansson, Niederreiter, and Tomasino could do the same thing?
I think they could. I think they could get up there or very, very close. We're talking within probably 5 to 10 points. But I think they're going to have to produce. If they don't produce, they're going to have to figure something out in terms of tweaking lines and stuff.
One thing about Ryan Johansson that he didn't used to do is shoot the puck. Ryan Johansson had 26 goals last year, and I think that's an underlooked stat on the radar because he usually was a passer. To see 26 goals and then 30-something assists, he had 63 points. So I think he can at least do that again, or more would be great considering he's a solid chunk of our salary cap. You want to get all those points out of him as you can. Niederreiter had 44 points last year, 24 goals, 20 assists. Let's get all three of those guys to be in the mid-20s on scoring.
On goals, I love that. And I think that what you're going to have is, I think you're going to have the Johansson centering that, but I think Niederreiter is going to go to the front of the net. You have Tomasino has a really good shot and the speed on the outside, and Johansson, who is honestly a big body. I'm thinking each of those guys is going to have a 60-point year if they play well, and I think it's very doable. All right, let's move on. Third line, what do you guys have? Are there any surprises on the third line for you guys?
The Herd line. No surprises here. It's Trennan, Yakov Trennan, Colton Sissons, and Tanner Jeannot. Nothing besides that. I loved that line last year. Every time they were out on the ice, you knew something was going to happen, whether it was a goal, a fight, someone's getting their butt put on the ground. It was something almost every time they touched the ice, and they made plays happen. I mean, Yakov Trennan had a great year. So did Tanner Jeannot. Fell off a little bit towards the end of the season, and then Colton Sissons is just consistent. So I love that line. I think that's a non-negotiable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, everything you said there, I think that Herd line there it's a good line to have because you don't want just all complete, somebody that just has speed. You need a line that can, kind of go out and especially let's put out last night, you're playing Tkachuk and Cousins. You need somebody that can go out and, hit a little bit rather than just straight speed. So I think that's a really good line. They can still produce, and that's something you need. If you're going to have a hitting line, they still need to produce a little bit in the offensive side of the puck. And so it's a really good line. I think it'll be pretty much the same as last year.
Yeah, I agree. That's who I have all the way on that line. They were really solid defensively. It's weird. Yakov Trennan was not a big assist guy. Like I think he only had 24 points. Let me look at this real quick. Yeah, he had 24 points last season. 17 of those goals. Bizarre to me.
That's crazy.
It's weird to look at like Tanner Jeannot last year had a very similar season to Nino Niederreiter. I think all these guys can take their game up a little bit. I think I kind of expect them to maintain where they are. I would love to see Jeannot not finish, and Sissons specifically as well, not finish with dud seasons, because they both, like in the last 20 games, were totally quiet last year. I would love to see them play a complete 82 game season and really maximize every time they're on the ice in every single game that they're out there.
Agree.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. This is where I think things get a little bit crazy. The fourth line and some scratches. So who makes your roster? Who is a healthy scratch every night? Who you carrying along with you? I struggle with this one, you guys. This one was tough for me. I'm just going to throw mine out there and then let you guys rip it apart or agree with it. I had Cody Glass at center. He looked good to me last night, and I know it's preseason, but I thought he looked good. I have Eeli Tolvanen at left wing, and then this is where it's tough, and I think people will punch me in the face. I have Luke Evangelista at right wing. That's probably a hot take. What do you guys have?
Mine was pretty similar. I had Cody Glass at center, Eeli Tolvanen right wing, and then I had John Leonard at left wing.
Interesting.
So, and I don't know why, Like I said, this fourth line is a little bit interesting. But I threw him there because I really wasn't sure who else to really put right there for now. But I had Michael McCarron as a scratch, or he played a lot last year. I mean, he's going to play this year as an option. So I'm not sure. That's a tough one.
Yeah, this one was tough. I mean, I had the exact same thing actually as you, Ben, with Luke Evangelista there. But I think he could flip flop in and out of the lineup.
That was my thought process.
And only getting to see him once yesterday, and that one time, I wouldn't say it was probably his best game, but he's also probably nervous in his first, NHL preseason game. So I think he'll flip flop in and out of the lineup, but I'd like to really see him get a shot at it and see how he does in an actual, NHL game. But we'll see.
There were
Did he play in the first game?
He played in the 3:00 game yesterday.
That's why I didn't have him on my list, because I was like, who is that guy?
Yeah. Yep. And I will tell you something interesting about him. And Heath, I know I looked over at you and said some of this stuff during the game. But there were moments when he made a pass or something like that. And it was like, that's not a pass that some of these other guys, like, it was definitely an NHL mind. My one caveat with that is he needs to be playing at least 12 minutes a night for me to be okay with him being in Nashville. If he's not, and I don't know, maybe on a second power play unit. If not, let him develop in Milwaukee. He has not had a year in the AHL. But if they think that he's somewhat ready, I would love to see him go to make it. He has been so dominant in juniors that let's see what he's got.
Yeah, I agree. If he did really well in juniors, but if he comes down here and he's averaging 7-8 minutes of ice time or something. I mean, 10 maybe. It wouldn't be worth it would not benefit him to sit at all at how young he is and how much longer he has in the NHL. So, yeah, I think he would flip-flop in and out of the lineup.
I totally agree. I also had Michael McCarron. I think that McCarron, he played 55 games last year. If you're playing a physical team, I kind of like McCarron being in there. I don't love him as a player. I think he's just an existing body out there, but I do acknowledge his size, acknowledge that he works hard most games. And I'm okay with him probably slotting in there if you're not going to have Evangelista. And then my other healthy scratch was Mark Jankowski. He's had a couple good years in the NHL, played in some minors, but he's had enough NHL experience, and he's not super young. I'm not really worried about getting him developed. Just give me a body that can be a serviceable NHL player.
Yeah, 28 years old. He has the experience, so I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, real quick. Let's walk through our defensive pairs that you guys have for this season. Starting first defensive pair, who do you want to see?
Yossi Carrier.
Heath?
Yeah, I've got Yossi Carrier.
And I'm right there with you guys. I also have Yossi Carrier. To me, that's such a logical pairing. It doesn't. Some would say maybe throw Fabro up there, but no. I think Yossi Carrier is the pairing. Second pairing of defensemen. Who you guys got?
The guys that did it last night. Give me Ekholm and McDonough. I thought they worked well together, especially never really playing together before. So I think they're going to be able to build that chemistry this year.
Yeah, I agree. Ekholm and McDonough there. I don't, sometimes I want to slot Fabro into that slot, but I don't really think he can keep up with McDonough.
Heath, interesting. So you're saying, when you say you don't think he'd keep up with McDonough, do you think, who would you slot to the third pairing? Would you slot McDonough or Ekholm down if you slotted Fabro up?
And that's the problem I run into. I'd probably end up slotting. I would slot. It would be tough. I think it's going to have to be a matchup deal. I think it would be a game by game basis. But I in reality, 90% of your games are probably going to have Ekholm and McDonough. but I think it would just be a really odd matchup thing. So
I tend to somewhat agree. I don't love that both of those guys are left-handed, but what I do love is I think that it'll be hard to score on those guys.
Yeah, that was the only stipulation I had. I didn't like both of them being left-handed because it limits your offensive zone draws. But same time, yeah, I think they'd work out just fine.
I agree. All right, third pairing. This is another thing where it's like who's in, who's out. Who you guys have as your bottom pairing there?
So Fabro is too skilled to not have on this defensive pairing. But like I said, it's contract year for him. He has a lot to prove. I think I've just been expecting more from him. So I am going to slot him on the third line. Who is going with him could be controversial. I mean, I know we've thrown out a few names last night, but I have Jeremy Lauzon sliding in that slot, and then Borowiecki being a healthy scratch. Those two could really flip-flop any night of the week. So,
yeah,
that's my thought as well.
I agree. I think Borowiecki, I just can't pronounce his name. Borowiecki, sure. That guy. Yeah. Depending on the team you're playing, if it's a more physical team, I think you throw him in there.
Yeah.
He was trying to fight last night, and I was like, man, I mean, respect. He was hitting like crazy, which was funny for a preseason game, for sure. But hey, I think that the defensive pairings have really slotted into a pretty good spot. And I think our defense is actually pretty stout here in Nashville. I think that it's a pretty solid defensive group. All right, goaltenders. UC Saros is the clear starter. Who is your backup?
How was it asked? I asked you this and Heath this question last night when we were sitting at the game. I said, guys, who's going to back up Saros this year? Because, I mean, there's a few guys that could. Connor Ingram, Lankinen, and then you have a Skarov coming over. I think it's best for a Skarov to stay in Milwaukee, get some seasoning under his belt. And Ben, I know you had mentioned Lankinen. So I'll go with him. He looked great last night when he played, so wouldn't mind seeing him down here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously Saros is your number one. I like Lankinen. He's got the NHL experience. Ingram, obviously we saw him in the playoffs last year. I don't see that being a thing where he stays here as a backup. I think him and Askarov end up going and holding down Milwaukee. And I think they bring Askarov up if UC Saros gets hurt or Lankinen gets hurt to give him some time in net up in the NHL. But I like him being in Milwaukee since he hasn't really seen much of the NHL, especially that sized ice is a very different, playing. It's just different from the perspective of a goalie. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys just said. I would love to see, I almost want Askarov to be the starter in Milwaukee this year. I don't like Ingram's a solid goalie, but he's not the future of the team. Let Askarov get the reps, and they're not going to, they'll probably split time, but do we not feel like Askarov and Heath, you played goalie your entire life, have been through goalie sessions for days. What's your take on Askarov? You saw him in person for the first time last night. Judge him righteously, not with the glory of Askarov, but what do you think about him?
Obviously when he first got drafted, everybody's like, man, this guy's going to be good. I remember our first few videos we got of him in training camp. I mean, the way he can play the puck is fantastic. And I mentioned this to you last night. I mean, playing the puck now as a goalie is key. And I said this to you last night too, that Saros is a great goaltender, but he does lack a little bit in playing the puck. You used to see Pekka do that in the playoffs in 2017. They'd dump it in, throw it, he'd stop it and throw it back out and create an offensive zone rush. But man, he looks very technically sound. Obviously being a different goalie in full right, but he's very technically sound. He doesn't give up a lot of rebounds. And if he does, it's kicked far enough away that he has enough time to react. I think he needs to probably, in terms of his style of play, it's great. Maybe just kind of dim down the all over the place a little bit every once in a while. I think we saw him kind of slide out of the crease and end up in the slot almost. Tinker with that a little bit, but otherwise I thought he looked great. I mean, he really, really looked very good.
And I love Pecorine being around to help work with him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a big presence in the locker room for every goalie there. I mean, even Saros, to have somebody back that he knows, he grew up, basically in the league when he first got here. I mean, it's somebody he can, talk to about a different situation. So I think it's great for all of them having him back.
I totally agree. All right, guys. Well, that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you guys for being here. And we'll look forward to, I don't know if we'll get at next week's recorded on the usual Tuesday slot that we're going to try to get it recorded. It might be a little bit later in the week, but we will definitely get another pod recorded next week. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you again so much for listening to today's episode. It truly means so much to us. If you're watching on YouTube right now and don't mind hitting the like and subscribe button, that would be incredible. We are on that road to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and that would help us get there if you were to hit the subscribe button. If you enjoyed today's episode, we are trying to grow this podcast and get it out there. So if you don't mind sharing it with a friend, if you're listening on Spotify or a place like that, send that link over to people, tweet it out, and tag me in that tweet. That would mean so much to me. Follow me on Twitter at McGreevyBen on Twitter. It is truly an honor to get to talk with my friends about a sport that I love and have listeners to listen to it. So that means so much to me. As is a custom here on the Ben McGreevy Sports Podcast, we are featuring an up-and-coming artist in the music industry. The artist we're featuring today is Zach Blair. Zach is a talented artist from Nashville, Tennessee. He has a country feel, and when you listen to his songs, they almost always cheer me up. One of my favorites by him is Just Because We Could, and so here is Zach Blair with Just Because We Could.
Just call it a night, start saying our goodbyes, stop falling in each other's eyes. Make this the one last kiss, wake up and I still miss sweet burning on my lips, yeah. Just because we could, it doesn't mean we should waste another second of a moment this good and let it slip away. It'd be easier that way. Just because we could, it doesn't mean we should. Yeah, just because we could. Yeah, we could both pretend that this ain't what it is, but it's just too hard to miss. We could let each other go, but we better take it slow. It's too dangerous when we're this close. Just because we could, it doesn't mean we should waste another second of a moment this good and let it slip away.